Welcome, everyone, to this sacred conversation. I love having conversations with Ange de Lumiere, who's a spiritual lawyer. We always seem to just go into these most amazing places and talk about these incredible topics and end up somewhere off on this beautiful tangent. So today, welcome, Ange, and please just let people know, what does spiritual lawyer actually mean, so I don't go off on a tangent myself.
Well, first of all, Chantal, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate that. I appreciate our conversations too, and I'm hoping that this is going to be useful for your audience because I'm anticipating we're going to talk about shame in the spiritual circles, which is something that's very dear to me to bust. Because I believe that the opposite of love is shame and judgment. And I have never seen as much judgment and shame in spiritual circles as any other circles. So yeah. I think we need to make a big effort to step back, observe, and look at what's happening. Your question about spiritual lawyer, it's a title I gave myself probably about 10 years ago, when I tried to harmonize and combine two very different aspects of my life. So for 15 years, I was a business lawyer, a corporate lawyer. And then for 15 years, I explored spirituality and intuition through all sorts of modalities. And then I had to reconcile the two. And when I was asked actually by a friend of mine from university, what do you do now? And he tried to introduce me to some friends I'd lost touch with and said, oh, Ange is now a spiritualist. I had this really big jumping, reaction saying, no, I'm not a spiritualist. I'm a spiritual lawyer. And from there, it helped me to conceptualize what it is for me. And for me, it's being able to combine logic and magic. It's being able also to come at the lengths of spirituality with my rigorous legal mind and busting myths and not accepting things for granted or at face value, digging deep and actually embracing true spiritual laws. And so far, I've only found two laws, whereas I've heard spiritual teachers talk about the 90 whatever laws of the universe, or and they usually pull it out of their hats, or they pull it out of scriptures that have been written thousands of years ago in societies that weren't as evolved as we are. And surely we should be updating our filters, our ethics and everything else. So yeah, that's a bit long answer to your question. I hope it wasn't too long that people got starting to glaze over. But I feel it's important to bring to that space some clarity and some challenge and some critical thinking. And I think that's what the lawyer in me brings along.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I really like about you, because, and this is why I think shame in spiritual circles is really powerful to talk about, because I know for me, I lost critical thinking when I was going through trauma and had PTSD. So I bought into a lot of what was said and allowed myself to be bypassed, and what was happening for me to be bypassed. And I did, looking back now, and it was also through our conversations and working with you, did I realize I was actually experiencing a lot of shame, because how could I not get it? I was meant to be. I've been working with Reiki for 30 years, meditating for many years, even though we'll talk about meditating, but not that I want to be spiritual around that. But I've been doing all these beautiful things in my life. Then started questioning myself because they questioned it,
And I think we need to stop first having a preconceived idea what it looks like to be spiritual.
Yes.
Which is something I hope it's okay to mention my podcast, True Spirituality with Ange. I'm passionate about this because I want us to pursue true spirituality. And true spirituality cannot come from either cookie cutter approaches to spirituality. It can't come from a facade, from having a mask and doing something different behind the scenes. And it also can't come from trying to imitate someone else, because we can't. We're unique individuals. Different things will resonate with us. and we need to be, and I don't like the word authentic because it's bandied around and thrown around so much, because sometimes we can't be authentic because we don't feel safe being ourselves. But first we have to create that safe space within ourselves to be ourselves, to accept ourselves as we are, and to validate what we think, what we feel, what's right for us. And once we've done that, it's usually easier to feel safer in the outer world to really be ourselves and speak our truth and say what feels right for us without invalidating other people. So it's a fine tuning, it's a balance. We will get it wrong. and it's okay, because one of the probably major things in spiritual circles that I find the most damaging or toxic is pretending to be spiritual when really we're human.
Yes.
So we're not humans trying to be spiritual, we're spiritual beings trying to be human. And so to learn to be human is to have that humility, to realize that we are going to make mistakes, and that's okay, even if we've been raised to be shamed for our mistakes. And I was reflecting on that because I'm listening at the moment to Brené Brown's book on the power of vulnerability. It's not the first time I've listened to it, but it's a good reminder for me how much shame I was raised in. And my mother was the master of shame. And she did that beautifully everywhere. You never knew where it was coming from. And I suppose because it was my normal, I didn't realize how much shame I carried. And the problem with shame is that you keep it as a secret, and it hurts you from the inside. And you never want to talk to other people because you think they're going to judge you. So you have to free yourself. You have to find that key and give yourself that permission to say, I've done this. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to be ashamed of it either.
Yes.
And I'll give you a couple of examples. But the first time I realized how my mother operated is so my firstborn, when he was a toddler, had fainting spells. And he had to take medication to help with these fainting spells. And of course I was very worried about him because it was a condition that could be linked to sudden death syndrome or something like, or COD syndrome, whatever. So we had to be on this strict regimen of giving it to him every 8 hours, and so it disrupted my sleep, all sorts of things. So very, very tired mom, upset. Nobody wants their baby to be ill. And my mom was visiting at the time I had to give that medication. And my son refused to take the medication in her presence. I have very stubborn children, which is good in a way. So he was like, it was dead stop. It's not happening. And my mum's reaction was immediately to go into shaming him and trying to control and manipulate him. And I knew it was never going to work. So I whispered in my son's ear, would you like to go to your bedroom? So we went in his bedroom, and I don't even know how I thought of doing this. And I said, would you like to have your medication here rather than in the main room with grandma? Yes, mummy. Went to get the medication. He had it. Job done. So this sort of encapsulated for me something that resonated, because finally through my son, it was a gift. My children taught me so much. He was able to highlight how I had been raised and how I was constantly shamed for not wanting to take a medication. Something as simple as that. There's no shame in that. It could be because it tastes disgusting. It could be because I'm upset right now. It could be from so many different reasons. But I also understand why, because my children have refused to do so many things that sometimes you get to the point where you're just fed up and you just want it to happen. So then you come in at it, as a bully, which is very difficult. And then, of course, you're ashamed of it. So there's all that shame to unpack. And I had a very similar incident with my dad when my son was 2.5. So in the tantrum years, we know the terrible twos. And he, and I know we're steering away a little bit from spirituality, but I think it's important because it's spirituality in practice. And for me, spirituality is about kindness and awareness. And it's self-discovery and it's self-reflection. You can't be spiritual if you just go to church, someone tells you what to do, you do that, and then you just sleepwalk through your life. You have to have that that desire to understand what can be changed in you, why you should change it, and also that critical eye about what people are doing around you, and not just do the same because someone else is doing it. So I hope it's okay to share also the little example with my dad, which was also an enlightening moment, actually. My children have taught me everything I needed to know about spirituality. They've been my biggest spiritual teachers. So still, same little boy, he's 2.5. And of course, he has tantrum after tantrum because that's the age. And it's a stage of development. And it's important for them to rebel against you. So they're not these cute little creatures anymore. They will say no. They will roll on the floor to get what they want, in public if possible, in the middle of the supermarket when there's a little old lady that's going to come and tell you, how come you don't control your child? Or she has either no idea or she's completely forgotten what it's like. And so you're shamed publicly because you're disrupting other people's peace. So I have my child, I'm visiting at my parents' on holiday. My dad is there. And when my son has a tantrum, my dad makes a beeline for him and he shouts at him at the top of his voice, this big, loud man with this tiny little boy, breaking my heart, and says, I do not accept little children who shout. And I look at him and I say, you are 2-year-old, Dad. You are a 2-year-old and you're now reacting to this little child because you were not allowed to have a tantrum. And now you're putting it on him and you're shaming my son for what happened to you. So we're getting back to that thing about shame. If we don't process it, we're going to act out on someone else, whether it's our own children or people, random people in the street, or our friends. Usually we do it more to family because we think we're safe doing it. And I think that's actually, we should respect and treat our family better than anyone else, but it's actually usually the opposite that happens. So I've also experienced, because my parents, my father came from a very religious background, how much shaming there is, how much judgment if people don't do this or that, or look at what she did, or she was unfaithful to her husband, how dare she, and it just perpetuates this toxicity because nobody knows. Let's take the example of someone being unfaithful to their husband, and it's a devastating event for everyone. You don't know why this happened. You don't know how it's happened. You don't know what's behind the scene. And also, I want to say that thing because I was there myself. You have no idea if you're capable of doing the same thing until you are cornered in that place. And it happened to me. I fell off my pedestal because I was unfaithful to my first husband. I never thought I would be. It was so far from my ethical framework. For many years, and of course because I'd observed a lot of adults in my family of origin who did that, I was very judgmental towards it, never thought I could do it, and yet I did. So I think this was actually my very first spiritual lesson, is to think, okay, I'm capable of that. I had no idea I was. Now it's time to look within and to have both compassion, but also stop bullshitting myself and blaming others for what I'm doing.
And I think that's a really, really good point you've made there. And I'd like to come back to everyone. I will pop the link to Ange's podcast in the notes as well.
Can I add just one thing before you feedback? Because I blamed my husband for me being unfaithful to him.
Yeah,
absolutely. I was so much in that culture of blame. I didn't take responsibility for it. Yeah. I didn't even see I had another option. But today, of course, when I look back, I do want to hug my younger self because she was in a lot of pain. But I wouldn't blame my husband again if I did something like that. Yeah. So it's important to have that honesty towards ourselves, but that's what the ego does, and everybody has an ego. Anyone who tells you that they don't have an ego is lying to themselves. And what you do when you lie to yourself about your ego is you're literally asking other people to take responsibility for your shit. Sorry for swearing. Because you're not going to say, it was me, I had another choice, blah, 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 blah. Does that make sense?
Look, it does make sense. And I think something else you're saying about shame, like you said, blame, but I think we'll get down to this too with the spiritual world. they then turn it back on you too. So you're getting a double whammy because they're blaming you for not getting it right, or something like that, or not being spiritual enough. So there's this constant. So the one minute you're being shamed or blamed, and then the other minute you're blaming someone else because you don't know where you stand in this, because you've lost sight of who you are. And I really appreciate sharing those personal experiences, because that's about being human. This is what it's about. Being spiritual is not all love and light.
And actually, if you think, of course, we want to be love and light, and that's why we have these aspirations.
Yes.
But if we don't have realistic expectations about who we are, and of course, it's always a good thing to try to be a better person than you are. But you can only be that if you unpack your past, your beliefs, your stuff, so that you don't ask someone else to carry it for you, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
And there was a time when I would say I could never even envisage for myself to call myself a spiritual teacher or a spiritual lawyer because of all the things I've done, like I've just explained, being unfaithful to my first husband. But I'm like, it's part of life. It's made me more compassionate towards people who do that. And I think sometimes it's important to have a peek into the bigger picture to understand why we've done something, or why something has happened, and the dynamics between two people.
Yeah.
And no one else can understand it but you and that person. And sometimes the other person's not playing the game either. They're still in the blame and shame game. So then you have to remove yourself from that situation and, go to someone like you, Chantal, or, anybody else who can help you have a safe space, because for most part in society, we're not safe to be human. We're only safe if we conform. We're only safe if we, go along what society expects of us. And that's also why, most marginalized groups are not safe in our society, because we do not create this space where people can truly be themselves and are supported on their own journey of whatever's happening for them.
Mm-hmm. And that's so true. And I think, again, this is why these conversations are so important. And thank you for honoring my work, because I, like you, I had to work. What was spirituality? What did it mean for me too? How did I push through all that? And it was only when I actually stepped away for a while a few years ago, and I stepped into the unknown, actually into this space I'm in now, and let go of everything of who I am as a woman, as a psychotherapist, in every single way, what I'd been taught, everything. Only then could I start seeing what you're talking about, the shame, the blame, not being myself, still being tethered. I needed to unpack it all to find out, who am I? So like you, for me, spirituality is who am I? It's in my heart. It's my essence. It's me, and therefore, who am I?
And in a way, so because you know my podcast, that the very first question, the very first episode is asking, am I spiritual?
Yeah.
I resisted calling myself spiritual for a very long time because I didn't want to have that mantle of judgment and shame and it comes from that old-fashioned, and here I'm going to be very culture centric, okay? I'm a white woman from the Western world. I live in Europe, and so I come from Catholic background, Christian background, where most people depict God as being this bearded white man who is vengeful, who is cruel, and very judgmental. And for me, that is the absolute opposite of God, if ever there was one. And I also don't believe that there's a binary aspect to it. So I don't buy into God or the goddess. God is just pure love energy. And how can you put a gender on that? It's ridiculous, just to start with. Now, I know when I say ridiculous, I'm judging people who are still in the tradition of calling God he and a man or whatever, or who are making God impersonate human beings. But I think we need to deconstruct a lot of things, because at the end of the day, I think the only thing that matters is kindness and compassion. And it starts with us, because if we're not compassionate and kind to ourselves, we cannot find it in ourselves to be kind and compassionate for others. And I'm still struggling with that.
Of course. And I think and I think coming back to what you're saying is, that's why I like these conversations, because this is coming from you. This is giving people an idea. Yes, they might be triggered, they might not agree, but it's giving people an idea that perhaps you can start questioning, or perhaps deep down you go, actually, I agree with that, but I haven't had the courage yet to step out and go, you know what? I no longer want to subscribe to that. But that's why I like what you say, why we do these conversations, Ange. I think it's important.
Mm.
You know, and that's why I'd like your opinion and your thoughts and thinking outside the square, yet honoring those who are still there. This is just giving people options and ideas.
And I think if you're not confronted with ideas that clash with yours on any level, whether they're comfortable or not, you'll never grow, because you just keep thinking what you're thinking, or what your parents were thinking and their parents before them. And I suppose people will start questioning these thoughts, these beliefs, when there's a dysfunction, when there's a discomfort, when things don't work. And I think for me, definitely things didn't feel right. I wasn't particularly happy as a child. And so from a young age, I started questioning things. It led me actually to tell my dad when I was 12 that I didn't want to be confirmed in the Catholic faith. And he was actually, I have to give it to him. He allowed me not to do it. So, yeah. But still, I can see that I was conforming and people pleasing for far longer than I would like to tell you.
Yeah.
Because but it's a survival thing, to keep safe we have to conform. If we don't conform, usually we're putting ourselves at risk. So there's this whole, for me, in an ideal world, I would love a society that allows everyone to be safe, no matter what their beliefs, what their background, and wherever they're at. And we're sadly in the UK, we're going backwards on that. Yeah. We had reached quite a tolerant and open-minded society, and things are going, the pendulum is swinging in a way that breaks my heart. Yeah.
And I think we were talking about this the other day, same in Australia. I'm seeing it all over. It is really sad and it is heartbreaking. And I think, coming back to what you said, it's ironically, we stay bound by tradition because we want to feel safe, but in fact we're not safe in that space, but we don't realize it, because the fear for me, so these are my words, the fear of me unbinding myself from that was rejection, abandonment, loneliness, and no longer belonging. So again, I had to take me a long time to be able to go, it's actually, what is more important? What is more important? That or me being me?
And I want to say something that's probably going to be going against the grain, but I feel that the internet and technology has actually created this amazing connective space for people who are misfits and who don't fit in their local community, who don't fit in that. They're finally able to find each other online and create these supportive communities that would have never existed otherwise. Yes. So I actually believe also, and I have examples almost every day, that the spirit world communicates to us through technology, through the internet, through all sorts of things, and even the algorithm. So if people could see that as a space of creating freedom, and I know everybody says, I know there's no freedom, we're observed and there's censorship, etc. It's nothing like what it was 40 years ago, when the only thing you would hear was the propaganda from your own government, right? So there is that freedom that's been created thanks to the internet, thanks to Facebook groups or communities, and for me, it was actually an absolutely beautiful turning point in not feeling that loneliness anymore, because I felt alone in my world, in my physical world. But before I was even on Facebook, I was in the spiritual community called Gaia, and I met the most wonderful and delightful people. And finally, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. So I want people to honor that, because there's a lot of judgment about being on your phone in spiritual circles, or, spending too much time on social media. Well, I'm going to call the bullshit on that, because for some people, it's their lifeline. It's actually a breath of fresh air where they can meet. That's how we met, Chantal, isn't it?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So that is actually very important. And I think the internet, yeah, sure, there are some downsides, but just like there's downsides to create knives to cut food to prepare your meal. If you don't know how to use your knife, you will cut your finger. And we've all done it when we've, in our early years, but we don't blame the knife. We know that there's a sharp side to it, and that's what makes it a beautiful tool. And we learn how to use it safely.
Yeah.
Same thing with the internet, same thing with social media. Let's stop having that toxic, it's almost like criticism of something that first is free and then brings so much connection to people.
Yes. And I think, again, it's coming back to this is why, again, I love the conversations we have, because I think it's about changing how you see things. It is. I see the internet as positive. Sometimes I don't, depending what mood I'm in, I have to say. But I see it as connections, and social media means being social. And we can be social. Like you and I, we've met through here. We would never have met otherwise. Me in Australia, you in England, and we both have a commonality. You're full French, I'm part French. And there's all this amazingness has come out of this over the last, how long have we known each other? 4, 5, 6 years. So I think again, it's changing your attitude and not allowing yourself to be caught up again. Like it's caught up in where everyone else is going. It's how can you break that flow to go down your own path, your own lane? So again, this is why I want you to say those things, because it's going to get people to think, well, actually, I didn't think of that, but that's a really good point. Or I actually do think that, but I haven't had the courage to share that because I will be shamed or judged. And this is coming back to what we were talking about, how spiritual circles do shame you for that.
And so, yeah, we need to look into the shame in us. It's things, and for the longest of time, I couldn't have shared that story about being unfaithful to my husband because I held so much shame around it. I was like, how could I do this to him when I know that if he did that to me, I would be heartbroken.
Yes.
How irresponsible. And I had all these names, all these things coming up. And I just had to live with it. And it actually led me to try and understand the dynamics within romantic relationships. So how can things go wrong? And, it was inevitable we were going to divorce at some point. I can see that now because we were so dysfunctional. But at the time, I thought he was the one who had a problem because my mum had always done that to all of us. She never had a problem. Everybody else had. And I was repeating the pattern until one day I thought, okay, I need to look at myself. I need to look at my patterns. I need to, and it's interesting because I have an episode on my podcast about the top 6 things we need to do to start on a spiritual journey. And the first one is go to therapy or work on yourself. It's not go meditate. It's not chant or learn to hum or whatever it is. It's really looking at yourself.
It is really looking at yourself. And I agree with you. Now, just thinking about that, like you said, not necessarily meditating or yoga up on the hill. No, because even with meditation, the way I was taught was we went into our bodies and that. So this is why I find all this quite fascinating, because I woke up to the world and went, hang on, what happened here? Meditating means being spiritual. I just thought meditating meant doing that, working with therapy and that. But I think, I've lost what I was going to say. Yes, that's right, because meditation can also be bypassing, can also just be, you get ahas, you're only working at a certain level. Again, love and light and positivity, not really going deep within, because that's where it lies, is sitting in that pain. Well, that's how it's been for me to work through that, to allow something else to come into that space that I've created, which is full of love, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, and all those beautiful things that you're talking about.
So I think for me, one of the first and most brave things to do on your spiritual path is to take full responsibility of yourself and to acknowledge that you're capable of anything, the best and the worst.
Yes, I like that. Yes.
And constantly checking yourself in situations, because we are triggered all the time. And when you're triggered, you can either run away from the situation, run towards an aggression, or shut down. And we need to understand how that happens and how none of these reactions are actually healthy. And instead of resisting the trigger and being angry at the person who triggered you, saying, oh, being curious, open-minded, why did I react this way? What is happening to me? What is within me that is making me bark at that person, instead of just realizing that it's no big deal. What they think of us, what they think of me doesn't really matter. So if I react that way, that's because I have a wound within. And I need to urgently look at it.
Yes. And I think also something I was thinking about a bit earlier when you were saying this, when we have been shamed and when we are vulnerable and we don't feel enough, well, then, of course, we are drawn into these energies of, like, I know for me, when I was feeling at my lowest, I was drawn into this spirituality that took me out of my body. And I thought I was being so wonderfully 5D. Again, no disrespect to anyone, but I realized I was in this ethereal whatever. And all I did was, actually, when I realized that 3 or 4 years later, someone told me quite bluntly, stop what you're doing, come back here. I got a shock, and I didn't realize how much I had been, but not listening to me. I'd gone on this journey because I felt vulnerable. I needed to hear what they were saying. I didn't want to take responsibility for healing anymore. I wanted to hand it over and give my power.
Fix me. Yeah.
Yes, exactly right. Come fix me. Exactly right. So I was done with trying to fix myself. I was done with all of that. And I look back now and went, I mean, in a way, I needed to go there. Like you, we need to do these things, like you said, to find out, well, what does it mean? Who am I? How did I get there? Now I get it.
It's easy to be tempted to go into this fantasy world.
Yes.
Because it's alluring, it's appealing. It's like a social, an Instagram feed that's been perfectly curated and that has nothing to do with reality. We like to be thinking that we're different than we are. We would love to be, the perfect picture of the human being, but we are missing the point that being a human being is messy. And it's challenging. There's also some absolutely delightful moments that along the way, and there's a lot of them. Just take the senses, for example, how amazing our senses are. It's something so simple. It gives us so much pleasure. Sensuality in spirituality is something I'm going to talk about with my third guest in a week or two. Which I think is very important, always been denied in spirituality, because the body is this thing that you have to resist or put down. The body is the lower part of your existence. And yet, when I looked at the Bible, because I don't like reading the Bible much, but literally I came across something that said, the body is the temple for the soul, but it's only words in the Bible. Nobody embodies this truth. It's in there, but everybody ignores it, or seem to ignore it in the Christian tradition that I've been brought up and observing everyone around me. It seems that the body's considered as an evil, a necessary evil.
Yes. And I agree with you. And I think with that, again, coming back to also the intense emotions, we're not meant to feel anger, hatred, jealousy, anything like that. So, you think of those two, no wonder I know, you want to go elsewhere where it is more lot of like happiness and joy, and I call it ethereal, because being human, as you said, is messy, it's painful. And how do we reconcile that with our bodies?
Yeah.
And we are shamed. We are constantly shamed. So if you think about it, we are shamed in life, like from childhood, because I was too. Then we're potentially shamed in the spiritual world as well. So it's like, where do you go? So what is, for me, what became the lesser evil? Well, I realized in the end I needed to come back to me, because this is it here. It's me. But like, it's us, our body, And like you said in the very beginning, it's about how can you feel safe in your body and with yourself.
And it's very, very hard to be able to reach deep within to that sense of self-love and kindness for ourselves. Because I remember, and I really want to highlight this, before I went to therapy, I was terrified of finding out I was a monster. because I had been constantly told that I was acting like a monster as a child, because whenever I didn't do what my mum wanted to do, she made me feel super guilty about ruining her life. And, you know, she had sacrificed herself so much for me, and I was just not up to scratch. And she had completely unrealistic expectations. A lot of it due to her time, you know, the parenting knowledge at the time was pretty damaging. But it doesn't, you know, make my experience any lesser as a child of being constantly shamed for things I had no control over, because my brain wasn't developed enough for me to act differently than I did. And I still remember my mum calling me constantly in public a liar and a thief, and the level of shame that I experienced for that. And when I look back, I just want to give that little girl a big hug. I should want to give my mum a big hug too. I'm not in that space. I think she should give herself a hug.
Yes, that's right. And again,
But,
who says should? You know, again, should. Do you really need to?
yeah.
Again, this is again this spirit. We've got to do forgiveness and all this sort of
Oh,
stuff.
don't get me started on the forgiveness
No.
piece. We could actually let's do another conversation on that, because we were
Yes.
focusing on shame today, and I
Yeah.
think we cannot stop the shame and blame culture without starting with ourselves.
I agree. I agree.
Mm.
I agree. And you know, a story too, like but everyone, Ange is helping me write my memoir, which has been amazing, and what's been coming up. So again, a lot of shame, and writing it has been actually shame. I have felt quite. It's been interesting to write that because shame has come up. But I've been writing about my father who had a problem with alcohol, so he's an alcoholic, violent one, and I remember, again, I'm writing in there. He would use an excuse, so blame an expression on my face to go and have a drink. So for a long time, and I didn't know what that meant. So a long time, I wondered what was wrong with my face. What expression was I, you know, making for that?
Yeah. And it's so common for people to say, you made me angry.
Yes, that's it.
Well, if you do the work, you might still get angry, but you'll realize it's because of your stuff. And we're not children anymore. Whatever happens to us in the past, yes, sure, probably a lot of it was unfair. But at one point, we have to become adults and say, okay, it might have been the baggage that my parents handed me down because they didn't want to deal with it, but it's mine now because it's not theirs anymore. They've handed it to me, and I can continue to blame them and feel angry about it, or I can unpack that suitcase and get out everything I don't want from it, because I don't have to keep carrying these suitcases that have been handed down to me.
Yeah.
And that's, if you don't mind me adding, that's the one thing I did before I became a mum, is go to therapy so that I would unpack the suitcases so that my children wouldn't have to carry mine.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Because they say it's generational. How many generations? It used to be 7 generations to actually fully break the pattern, and everyone would have to do that, you know. So yes, it's powerful. I can't
It's
remember
not
what else
easy.
I'm saying.
It's not
No,
comfortable.
it isn't. Oh, that's what I was going to say. It isn't easy. It isn't comfortable because years ago, you know how someone says, this is just how I am, or this is just how it is. You have a choice. By not making a choice is also a choice. There comes a point, like you said, where at some point you've got to say, right, no more. This needs to change, or I need to change, like you said. And I can remember a therapist saying to me years ago, when I was working around my father, I could keep blaming and remaining the victim, or I could hold him accountable and become responsible. You know, because he was accountable for what he did. There's no denying he did those things. But, you know, it's what I then do with it now.
And I want to add something, which might seem a little bit random, but, you know, with the war in Israel and the terrible things that are happening there, I saw a Facebook friend post, you know, what can I do to help there? This desire to go and help the other people who are at the heart of a horrid conflict. Well, I believe, rightly or wrongly, that for as long as we have that energy within our hearts, with our neighbors, with our whatever, whoever it is, there will still be war on this planet, because it starts with us. We cannot, yeah, we can send money to Israel, but if we don't look at the conflict within us, if we don't look at whatever war we're raging against ourselves sometimes, then the peace energy cannot come in, because it's in all of us and it can be sparked in a minute. I'll tell you something that happened in my village that astounded me, and yet it shouldn't have, because it's so common. I live in a peaceful little village in the southwest of England, overlooking a river, whatever. It's, you know, if you drive through it, you'll probably think it's the ideal village in the world, right? Everybody would want to live here. The moment there was a planning permission to install a helicopter base in the village, everybody's ugly whatever started to raise out of them. And there was this lady who had smiled at me for 6 years, but because I didn't support the project, suddenly she started hating on me. Like, it was instant. And I was like, war could happen in my village, and quicker than I can say Bob's my uncle. And it can happen in your family, and it can happen in your neighborhood. So but it can only start with us, because we cannot change anyone else. Right. So I was able to hold even though I didn't like her stance, and I didn't like what she did to me, and I didn't even like the position that she took in the conflict that tore apart our community, at the same, because I can always see both arguments, which is why I ended up studying law and being really good at it. Is that, and that's what used to drive my mum absolutely nuts, is that I would never agree with her for the principle of agreeing. She was trying to rope me into all the things that she believed were, oh, this is outrageous, this shouldn't happen. I was like, but actually, I can see that from this point of view. And so I could see the point of view of that woman and why she thought it was the right thing to have that helicopter base installed in our village. But at the same time, I could also see that there were other people in the communities that were very legitimately concerned about it. And so the debate actually shouldn't be throwing muds at each other. But that can happen in an instant. And look, our politicians are not even showing a good example of this, yes. Sadly. So we have this whole culture that's filtering down from the top, of the mudslinging, the shaming, and look how we shame our celebrities as well.
Yes.
I find it disgusting that just because they're celebrities, suddenly they are the target of mass hate. And suddenly this gives permission to the media to tear them to pieces. They are human beings. Whether they're famous, rich, or whatever it is, and you don't like it because maybe you're jealous, it does not give you authorization to act like a subhuman being.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And I agree, because we've had that same here with the referendum about having the voice for our First Nations go into the Constitution. And it ended up being ugly, like very ugly, the no's and the yeses and each other and the attacks. And it was phenomenal. Like, you was like, how did we end up here? And we're forgetting that these First Nations, they're the ones that people were, they weren't actually considering this. It was this, and a lot of it was fear-based. It became a fear campaign, which was really a shame.
That's how populism exists. That's how people are manipulated. We are constantly being manipulated through our fears. And if we don't think we have any fears, then we are delusioned as well. We are all, and I'm full of fears, and I can see that all the time. So some people call that the shadow in the spiritual world. Other people could say we all have evil in us. I don't really like talking like that, because it makes it want you to shame it and push it down and ignore the fact that it's there. Yeah. So I think it's much more, I like much more the attitude of Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote an entire book on anger and how you need to welcome anger and treat it like a child and nurture it, and because it can be a force for good. But to do that, you have to do the work.
You do, exactly. And this comes about do the work. That's what it comes back to. And I think, again, manipulated through our fears. And again, I'd like to come back to sort of coming to the end, is I feel that's what the spiritual world is doing too. It's manipulating people's fears and holding them captive. And you don't realize you're captive. And then what I learned from me was then it becomes addictive. I kept searching. I kept going to this one, rather than I could no longer discern. I no longer had that discrimination. Questioning. but it was manipulating
That's
my
because
fears.
mental manipulation and coercion is so rife and it's so common, and you don't see it coming.
That's right.
And this is why I'm going to talk on my podcast about how the mind works, because the more people understand how their mind works, the less they're likely to be manipulated by others.
Yes.
And that's super important as well.
Yes, it is super important. And, you know, it's like you can be manipulated by the most unexpected person, you know, you sort of like, and then, and this is, you helped me unpack something that I didn't, you know, I couldn't see it at first. I knew something wasn't right and I didn't want to admit it or acknowledge it or whatever. It couldn't possibly be. But in fact, it was. And that was also through your help. And again, that was through writing doing all this. You helped me unpack that this person that I had here on a pedestal was actually different to who I thought. But I had bought into it. I had, you know, that's where I was at the time because I didn't.
And I think it's also because abuse is not pointed out, it's not highlighted in society. There's abuse at all levels, and it's almost like this game is like everybody does it, so there's nothing wrong with it. Whereas right. If you take a step back, you see, oh my god, this is happening, how can people really do this? Right. But it filters down from the top again, you know. It's this toxic subculture, and I think for me, being spiritual is starting to become aware of this. And I will say, I know we're coming to the end of this conversation, don't want it to be too long, but I will say that having 4 autistic children has been they've been my biggest spiritual teachers, because they've shown me how dysfunctional society was through how they were treated. But they've also taught me how to not people please as a parent, which is the hardest thing to do. You get sucked into this tunnel where you want your child to perform and to do well and to be popular and to do this, because you're vicariously living through their success, filling your deep gap within with, you know, trying to ask your children to make up for whatever you're missing or whatever it is in yourself that's not satisfied. That is completely dysfunctional. And yet it is happening. I would say, hazard a guess, probably in 80 to 90% of families, parents do that to their children.
Oh yeah, I agree.
So there is a big difference between normal and healthy. And that's the first step, I think, on our spiritual journey, is to realize that normal can be very unhealthy.
It can be, and it can be a real facade. Or just like, because when I look back, for example, with my mum, she was the gracious lady. You know, she was everyone loved her, highly spoken of, a good ilk, cups of tea and this, that, and that. So, of course, she could draw you in, because why would you believe this lovely little old gracious lady? And the same with this person we're talking about. They were spiritual. They were all light and love, all into ritual. So again, there was this big facade created. No, that can't be my mum. No one would believe that can't be that. So yes, I agree with you. And I need, like you said, need to come back to look at, well, yeah, exactly. That became normal. As you said, we get used to it.
And if I can add one more point for our audience, your audience, is that this is the reason why intuition is snuffed in ourselves as early as possible, because the more we lean into that intuitive energy, the more we see through the BS that people are doing, and it's dangerous. So our whole education is meant to create and produce compliant individuals who will not challenge what they're told, and who you know, fit well in society and play the part. And I'm not saying that we should be destructive either, right? This is not a call for anarchy, but it's a call for discernment and creating a movement that will how do you say, steer us in a better direction.
Love it.
Because in fact, we haven't evolved that much in the past 2,000 years in terms of collective behavior. War is still there, famine is still there, greed is still there, all these things are still there. So how can we create something different? Well, it starts with us.
It does start with us. I agree with you. And I think as we end, see, I went into the spiritual world to belong to a group, but I realized spirituality is not a lonely path, but it's your path. you know, and then I found now I'm connecting with different people for a sense of belonging, because we want to belong, don't we? And I agree
So
with
we
you.
could create a new group of people who are true to themselves, who
That's
will
it.
not abandon themselves in order to belong.
Yes, exactly. That's it. Not to abandon ourselves in order to belong. I think that's a beautiful way of, in a way, encapsulating what we've been talking about and what spirituality can mean. So what would you like to say to end this off? And, you know, mention your podcast again and how people can contact you, Ange, and everyone, it will be in the notes. So what would you like to say?
Because the whole discussion was around shame, I want to leave people with this thought, is that the moment you start to talk to someone about what you feel ashamed of, shame starts to subside, because shame, it's a little bit like the darkness. If you switch the light on, it will start to dissipate. And so I urge you to find a safe person that you can talk about whatever you're feeling ashamed of. That's what I'd like to leave people with. Now, I did say find a safe person. Well, a safe person who be someone who have been through shame, who understand the mechanism, and who are, well, highly trained, who have supervision. Because even the best of counselors or therapists, they need someone else to reflect on what they're doing to make sure that they don't dump their stuff on you. So, and if you ever go to a person who's starting to make you, so trust your body. If someone is starting to make you feel bad in your body, run away. It could be it's the discomfort of unpacking your stuff, sure, but you'll know the difference between someone who's not a safe person and someone who is. This is why we're wired with intuition, is to keep ourselves safe. So trust that intuition. I do have an entire podcast about intuition that people can explore. It's called The Intuitive Revolution in Business, but I think it applies to everything. Obviously, we've mentioned my True Spirituality with Ange podcast. That's probably the best place to find me. I'm on LinkedIn as Ange de Lumière, and I'm on Facebook, same name. And my page on Facebook is called True Spirituality with Ange as well. I do have a YouTube channel called Spiritual Lawyer as well. So various places, depending if you prefer video or audio. I think if I could leave people with a second little bit is trust that you know how to get back home to yourself, to the true person that you are. And it could be buried deep inside with lots of layers of everything that everybody else has told you. That doesn't matter. Whatever people have said before doesn't matter. We're all loving beings deep inside. And even the, you know, people who hurt other people and who are nasty and all sorts, they have that light within. It's just that it's buried so deep inside. But it's not your job to help someone who is in that darkness to bring that light. They have to do the work themselves. Focus, put yourself first. It's not being selfish, because you put yourself first for two reasons. First is because nobody can love yourself as much as you. You can only receive as much love as you give yourself. And yet I've been raised my entire life to as you know, being judged for being so selfish. There's that needs to be deconstructed as well. So yeah, sorry, it was a bit of a longer conclusion, but that's what I'd like to leave people with.
Thank you. And I love it. No, Ange, this is please don't apologize, because this is what it's all about. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening. Leave any comments, we'll get back to you. And please go and look up Ange, because yeah, you will get nuggets, most probably way more than you realize. And even if it doesn't feel like it resonates yet, go and listen anyhow, because it's about opening your mind to something else. It's about learning. That's what I've done, is learning something, even if I don't agree with it. It might be that it just gives me something to think differently, or to just change a little something that I've been thinking. Thank you, Ange, for coming on board. Love it. Thank you, everyone. And I will see you in my next one. And I think another topic will be very needed. Thank you. Bye.